The Boy at the Back of the Class, Chapter 10, War and Missing Pieces. The day after the big fight, just as Tom had guessed, Emmett became famous. On the playground where he went, people pointed and gasped and called him the boy who beat him Brandon the bully. And they asked him a lot of questions. Is it true you can do 100 punches in under a minute? And what were you really fighting over? Was it your parents' ransom money? And when are you going to fight again? Can we come and watch? After a while, Miss Hamsey began to tell everyone to leave Emmett alone. So everyone started asking Michael and Josie and Tom and me their questions instead. I didn't say much and neither did Michael. But Josie and Tom got so excited that they started to add new beats to the story so that by the end of the week, most of the school believed Emmett hadn't just beaten up Brandon the bully, but had caught Chris and Liam too over a suitcase full of red diamonds and a pink basketball. All of this made Brandon the bully scowl more than ever. But even though he stared at us all the time, and Chris and Liam showed us their fists whenever they saw us, they didn't chase us around the playground or steal Josie's soccer ball or smash into us when we were carrying our lunch trays like we thought they would. I bet he's scared of us now that we've got Emmett, Tom grinned. Yeah, said Josie, he's real scaredy cat now. But Michael said he didn't like it one little bit and that he bet Brandon the bully was up to something. At first, I didn't believe him, but a lot of strange things began to happen to Emmett. The first thing happened just 2 days after the big fight. We had all been decorating a new pot for our photosynthesis plants, and Mrs. Khan had given Emmett a golden star because his plant had grown faster than anyone else's. I think that was because every morning before Mrs. Khan took attendance, he would water it and talk it to for 1 whole minute. I didn't know the plants could speak different languages, but when I asked Mrs. Khan about it, she said plants could speak every language under the sun, and that the more language they heard, the faster they grow. Emmett was really proud of his golden star, and he got a silver one too for decorating his pot with pictures of seashells and whales and fish. But when we got back from recess that afternoon, his pot was lying broken on the floor and his plant has been stomped on. Someone must have smashed it on purpose because nobody else's pots were hurt at all. Mrs. Khan said that if person who did it didn't put their hand up right away, they would be in big trouble. But nobody put their hand up, so the mystery of the murdered plant pot stayed a mystery. Then, almost exactly a week after the mystery of the murdered plant pot became the day of the deathly worm tray. After assembly one morning, Mrs. Khan told us to get our textbooks from our class cubbies. But when Emmett pulled his open, he found it bursting with a whole pile of large, fat, wriggling worms. He cried out and dropped the tray on the floor so that all the worms went flying across the room. That made Dean, who sat at the table behind me, throw up all over his table. Dian is scared of anything that doesn't have any legs on it, even snails, but he hated worms the worst. Mr. Whittaker, the school janitor, had to come and clean it up all. And Mrs. Khan and Miss Hamsey were very angry and checked all our cubbies, but no one else had a single worm, not even Tony the nose picker, who liked to collect all kinds of strange things in his cubby. Mrs. Khan told the person who had done it to put their hands up again, and this time she looked at Brandon the bully as if she wasn't really speaking to any one of us and only to him. But again, nobody put their hands up, so Mrs. Khan shook her head and said she was going to make sure that whoever it was be caught soon and punished, not just by her, but by Mrs. Sanders too. And then after that came the worst trick of all, the one that everyone in school later called the Great Big Bean Bag Trap. Every morning, right after Mrs. Khan takes attendance, everyone has to put their school bags on their special hook at the back of the class. And we are only allowed to take our PE uniform or homework or lunch boxes out when we were told to. Everyone knows whose bag is where because everyone's hook has their name on top. Just days after the day of deathly worm tray, Mrs. Khan told us to get up and collect our PE uniforms from our bags, just like she always did on Wednesday. But when Emmett went to get his uniform and unzipped his backpack, a lumpy river of baked beans burst out of and splotched and splashed all over him. Everyone cried out, "Ew!" and then instantly fell silent. Mrs. Khan was so angry when no one put their hands up that she cancelled PE, and Mrs. Sanders came and lectured the whole class. It was horrible, especially because Amos started to cry when he saw what had happened to his PE uniform and his bag. I think everyone knew it was Brandon the bully who had done all these things, but no one could prove it, not even Mrs. Khan. After that day, the door of the classroom was locked every recess and lunchtime. We stopped anything else from happening to Emma's things. But I wanted more than anything for Brandon the bully to be caught and to prove he was a criminal. So Michael brought his granddad's magnifying glass in, and we all searched for clues. But we couldn't find anything, not even in the school trash cans. Emmett was more upset about the great baked beans backtrap than any of the other things that has happened. And even though Mrs. Hemsey washed his backpack with lots of soap, it looked even worse than before and it smelled strange too. But Emmett still brought it into school every day. I wanted to know why he didn't get a new one, or why Miss Hemsey kept saying that it looked fine when it didn't. And then just 2 days after, great baked beans backtrap, I found out. We had all put away our books and were getting ready for group story time, just like we always did on Friday when Mrs. Khan made a surprise announcement. "Now, everyone," she said, "this is our last afternoon before we all leave for fall break, and I thought we could do it with a treat. Instead of us all reading a story together, we are going to listen to one instead. And it's a very important story because it's going to be told to us by someone very special in our class." Looking over at Emmett and Miss Hemsey, she waved them over to where she was standing. I didn't know it just then, but I was about to have nearly all of my original 11 questions answered at once. We all turned around to watch as Miss Hemsey picked up a large pile of papers from the table and followed Emmett to the front of the class. I want everyone to listen extra carefully. I don't want anyone asking any question until after Emmett has finished telling his story. Is that understood? "Yes, Mrs. Khan," shouted the class. "Good." And leaning against her desk, Mrs. Khan smiled and said, "Emmett." Everyone shuffled in their chairs and sat up straight, waiting for Emmett to speak. I wondered if he could tell the story in English or in Kurdish, but I was so excited I didn't really care. "Hello, my name is Emmett. I am 9 years old. I am a refugee. I come from Syria." As he said this, he pointed to Miss Hemsey, who held up a drawing showing a house and a tree and a car in front of some mountains. And in front of the car were 4 people labeled me, Mom, Dad, and sister, and a cat. I was surprised because I had never thought about Emmett having a brother or a sister. I thought he was like me and didn't have any. His sister wasn't at our school. In the picture, she looked smaller than him. So maybe she was in daycare. "But in Syria, there is a big war," said Emmett, and he pointed to Miss Hemsey again, who held up another picture. This one showed building on fire and bombs dropping from a plane and lots of people lying on the ground and other people holding guns. Josie stopped chewing her hair and looked at me and then looked back at the drawing again. And from behind, I heard someone whisper, "Wow, he's seen a real bomb and a real gun." "Because of war, my family ran away," said Emmett as his lion eyes became big and round and watery. "We went on mountain and rivers and carried bags and cat." This time Miss Hemsey held a picture showing a family crossing mountains and rivers, and in the sky birds that were crying. In the picture, Emmett had drawn himself carrying a red backpack with a black stripe on it, just like one he had now. That was when I knew why he loved it so much and why he cried when it had been filled with Brandon the bully's horrible baked beans. He had carried it all the way from his house and over a mountain, which meant it was a lot more important and a lot more special than any of our bags. Then no, we're safe, so we got on a boat on Big Sea. This time Miss Hemsey held up a drawing of a boat, but the boat wasn't like a normal boat with sails and pointy ends and wooden sides. This one was flat and round and was orange on the sides, just like the ones I had seen on the news that didn't have any bathrooms on them. And inside the boat were lots of people, all wearing vests that made them look like puffin birds. But there was someone in the water too, and he had a bubble coming out of his mouth saying, "Help me!" Everyone leaned forward in their chairs and tried to read the labels. Emmett had put over some of the people's head. I saw me and Mum and Dad, but there wasn't one for sister or cat. I know cat don't like water because Josie has a cat and she said it screams whenever it rains and always wants to stay inside. So maybe Emma's cat didn't want to get into the boat, and maybe his sister didn't want to leave it behind, so she stayed behind to look after it. This was the boat picture. Then we are in another country called Greece, said Emmett. We live in tents and with lot of people who run away like me. They come from lots of countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan and Eritrea. The next picture showed a flag with blue and white stripes and a white cross in a blue corner, and next to it were lots of tents and people, everyone everywhere sitting next to fires and sleeping on floor. In this picture only the words me and dad could be seen. Emmett's mum must be sleeping inside one of the tents. Then we walk along long time in lots of country. It was cold and we sleep on the floor and we stayed in France. At this time Emmett pointed to the next picture with his finger and showed us the railroad tracks he had drawn. On it were people carrying suitcases and children, and all of them were walking to a wall with barbed wire on the top. Everyone looked sad, and in the corner there were army tanks and soldiers holding guns, and all guns were pointing at the people with suitcases and children. Miss Hempsey held his drawing up for longer than any of the others because Emmett was looking at it and didn't seem to want to stop staring at it. Then I come here and come to school. I like hero, no bombs. It's safe. And I like new friends and teacher and play soccer. Emma stood and stared at everyone, and everyone stared back. Mrs. Khan blew her nose loudly, and Miss Hempsey put the drawings down and gave Emmett a hug. Thank you, Emmett, said Mrs. Khan, standing up and putting a hand on his shoulder. Everyone, let's give Emmett a huge round of applause for being so brave and for sharing his story with us. We all clapped, but we didn't clap as loud as we usually do for stories because I think we were feeling strange. I don't think any of us had ever heard a story like it before, and as sad and as scary as it was even sadder and scarier because it wasn't just a made-up story from one of our reading books. It was all real. Emmett had survived everything his pictures had shown us and was here with us. Knowing that made me feel sorry and proud and scared for him all at once, but most of all it made me want to tell him he was definitely the bravest person I knew. Now, as you have seen, Emma's stories are very special, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions you want to ask him, said Mrs. Khan. Everyone's hand immediately shot up into the air, but I think mine was first. That's wonderful, Mrs. Khan smiled as she signaled to us to put our hands back down. But as Emmett is still learning his English words, we are only going to ask him 3 questions. I want you all to write down just one question for him on a piece of paper. Mrs. Khan walked around and gave us each a thin slip of blank paper. And when you are done, Miss Hempsey is going to pick up our 3 questions we can ask him. You have a few minutes to think of your question and write it down in your very best handwriting. Try to spell your words correctly and remember just one question each. The entire class felt quiet as everyone grabbed their pencils, put their heads down, and wrote out their questions. I had lots of questions and I wanted to ask, but I picked the one that was most new and wrote that one out. After a few minutes, Mrs. Khan said our time was up, and Miss Hempsey collected all the bits of paper. Everyone began to whisper to one another as Mrs. Khan and Miss Hempsey looked through our questions and either shook their heads or nodded. What did you ask? Whispered Tom, turning around. I asked, why didn't he stay in Greece? Because the weather's warmer there and they have more beaches, whispered Josie. Oh, I asked how fast he had to run to get away from the bombs, whispered Tom. Michael, what did you ask? Whispered Josie, leaning forward and poking Michael on the shoulder. I asked if it was scary to be in the boat and if he was on it at the night time, said Michael. That's 2 questions, whispered Josie, shaking her head. Then she looked at me. What did you ask? I asked what happened to his cat and what is his sister's name, I answered. Oh, said Tom. But that's 2 questions as well. Right, everyone, said Mrs. Khan, clapping her hands so that we all stopped whispering and looked to the front of the class. We have some excellent questions here, but we have chosen 3. I'm going to say them in English, and then Miss Hempsey is going to translate both the questions and answers for us, right? The first question is, what did your mom and dad do in Syria? Miss Hempsey spoke to Emmett in Kurdish and he said something back. Miss Hempsey nodded and then looked at us, said, Emma's father was a teacher and his mother wrote for a newspaper. Everyone in class nodded and we waited for Mrs. Khan to read out the next question. I crossed my fingers extra tight in the hopes that it would be mine. The next question is, what did you like doing most before the war happened? We waited for Miss Hempsey to tell Emmett what the question was and then the reply. He liked to play soccer with his friends, answered Miss Hempsey, and going to the park with his grandfather and eating kibbeh. She smiled at Emmett, and before any of us could ask what a kibbeh was, he explained, a kibbeh is a very special snack that is filled with minced meat in the middle and is covered with lots of delicious spices. It's very famous in Syria. And it looks like this. Miss Hempsey went over to the blackboard and quickly drew a shape. It looked like a small American football. Is that the right shape, Emmett? She asked. Emmett nodded. We all looked at each other and tried to imagine what an American football with minced meat in the middle might taste like. As Mrs. Khan held up the last sip of paper, I decided to cross both my toes and fingers, but it didn't work because then she said, and the last question is, do you sleep in tent or do you sleep in a house now? When Emmett heard this question from Hempsey, he shook his head and said something. No, he sleeps in a house now, said Miss Hempsey, and he's happy because there's a bathroom in it and hot water and food. As we all nodded to each other, Mrs. Khan put her arm around Emmett and said, let's give Emmett another round of applause, shall we? This time, everyone clapped much louder than before, and Michael even cried out, woohoo, as Emmett and Miss Hempsey went and sat back but I could see Brandon the bullying mouthing boo and making a face as if something smelled, and Liam giving a double thumbs down. I looked back at Mrs. Khan and Miss Hempsey, hoping that they had seen too, but they were busy looking at Emmett. Right, now everyone, before we leave today, I want you all to listen to me carefully. Mrs. Khan clapped her hands once and waited for everyone to settle back down. As I said, you all had some fantastic questions for Emmett. I am very proud of you thinking up such interesting and thoughtful ones too. And here, she looked at us with her eyebrows raised, which meant she was being extra serious and would be extra angry if we didn't listen to her. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that running away from a war and leaving your home is a very hard thing to do. And it's especially hard when you have to try to put up all missing pieces of your life back together again in a place that's new and strange to you. Then Mrs. Khan quickly glanced at me and Josie and Michael and Tom and said, I know that some of you miss Emmett when he is not allowed to go out and play, and I know you all have lots of questions for him, but it's very important that he talks to people who know that he had been through and who can help him feel better. And it's even more important that they can ask him the kind of questions you all want to ask him in a safe and secluded space first before he is ready to speak to other people more. Okay? Josie looked over at me and I looked over at her, and Tom and Michael looked over their shoulder to us. So that was what the seclusion was for. It was so that Emmett could talk to people. So, continued Mrs. Khan, I want you all to promise me that you won't ask Emmett any more questions about the war or about his family without asking me or Miss Hempsey first. Is that understood? Yes, Miss Khan, said the class as the final bell began to ring. Good, now row one, put away your things and off you go. Make sure you all have everything you need for your homework assignments over the break, and I will see you in a week's time. As we waited for our row to be called, I looked over my shoulder at Emmett and wondered what pieces he was still missing before he could pick his life back together again. It was like a jigsaw, I thought. I hate doing jigsaws, even the easy ones, because I always get bored halfway through, and I couldn't imagine trying to do one that had pieces missing. I sure hoped that when he was running away from all the bullies and the bombs, Emmett hadn't lost any of the important pieces on the way, and that if he had, someone was helping him find new ones that were exactly the right shape and colors that he needed.